Our next session, I'll get right to it, is a technical talk on network planning and deconfliction. And this is Chris Wieczorek. Thank you very much, Chris, and take it away.
Thank you. All righty, and let's see, we have my slides. Cool beans, it works. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Wieczorek. Again, I'm with T-Mobile. I'm a Senior Director of Spectrum Policy for the company in our Government Affairs office. I've been with T-Mobile, 14 years now. I started as an intern, and I guess if I started as an intern, it's 17 years now. But been working through a lot of spectrum issues, and many of those spectrum issues revolve around clutter. I want to see if is anyone here a veteran of the AWS-1 clearing process? Any hands? Needy, maybe? Were you a veteran of AWS-1? I think. Yeah, one person. Two. Oh, there you go. Three. If anyone remembers that process, the FCC auctioned spectrum at that touched federal government uses at 1710 to 1755 megahertz, and I think it was like $4 and some odd change $billion auction back then in 2006. And at the time there were some federal uses in the band. And the whole concept of clutter was not even considered or analyzed. There was nationwide protection zones. There were some localized protection zones. But when there was concerns about interference, like signals from wireless carriers going into federal operations and vice versa, clutter wasn't even considered. A couple years later, the FCC and NTIA and the wireless community embarked on another process that resulted in the AWS-3 band. I think presumably any veterans of the AWS-3 process still here? I know Needy was definitely part of it. I was part of it. I know some folks from NTIA were really critical, at NTITS were really critical in getting that across the finish line, and with measurements and the like. But even back then, clutter was a foreign concept, right? We had to fight tooth and nail in the wireless industry to get clutter taken into account, particularly with the Department of Defense, into the analysis. And here we are, thankfully now, some more than a decade later, and there is a uniform agreement that clutter is to be used and for analysis, I think. So I like to think that ever since I started as a law school intern, that we've seen a lot of progress here in the use of clutter and spectrum analysis and coordination. This picture I have up on the display here is of a lightning bolt, obviously, and it's a picture I took last week from a drone out of my house. We moved. I live outside of Virginia, in Virginia, outside of Washington Dulles Airport, and we just moved out there. And I'm able to fly drones legally now. If anyone lives in the DC area, you can't legally fly a drone within 15 miles of DC, and it's not like I would ever do that, not legally. But I got to fly this drone after a thunderstorm, and I was able to take this wonderful picture. And if I guess it's maybe a little bit different issue for folks here in Denver, but other parts of the country, when you live in a cluttered environment, you can't see everything. So I have, maybe a handful of times in my entire life living in DC, I've never seen cloud-to-cloud lightning before, right? I mean, you can see kind of like flashes of it, but getting this kind of great view that you can see that if folks live in a non-cluttered environment, like if you live in the Midwest or even here in Denver, right, you can see for quite a bit of ways. And clutter is a wonderful thing that is good, it is bad, and maybe you can be indifferent about it. But it's useful, and it's understanding how it's used in RF. And if you remember, light is just another part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And so I thought this was kind of a good intro, how clutter is both useful, but then not useful for purposes. So I'm going to talk about very simple slides here, and hopefully keep it somewhat interactive and interesting. 3 ways we view clutter in network design. Good, right? The good purposes of clutter reduces adjacent signal to adjacent users of spectrum, whether it's the Department of Defense or another wireless carrier. If Needy at AT&T, and if they have spectrum in the adjacent market, and it's literally sometimes the streets, like in Phoenix, I know like there's a street that separates 2 counties, and we have license on the left side, they have license on the right side, and you want to have clutter because it helps reduce signal and interference issues and stuff like that. So It's bad though, in the sense that it reduces signal to people. So everyone in this building right now, we are living in an extremely cluttered environment, right? Our sites, I don't think there's a distributed antenna system inside this building, and we have site signal bouncing off walls and coming through windows and going through concrete. I mean, this is the par excellence of clutter, right? And so that's a bad thing for consumers. And then there's the indifferent. Does it really matter to us as wireless carriers? And the answer is, it kind of depends. I think one of the folks I heard speaking earlier talked about money and how financial considerations are important for doing these analysis. And for wireless carriers, the question is, how detailed do you want to be in your clutter analysis and your considerations? So I wanted to bring up an example today that I think a lot of folks probably, I don't necessarily know. If anyone knows this, feel free to raise your hand and say, hey, Chris, I know about this. An example of some things that we as wireless carriers have to do where clutter becomes very critical and it's kind of public facing, right? I can tell you, like, we run our propagation maps. If you go to T-Mobile or Verizon or AT&T or something like that, you can go to their website. You'll see a propagation map. It will show coverage and where we think we have service and stuff like that. If you really did a deep dive in it, sometimes you'll see it's not particularly high resolution. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is. It depends on the carrier. Sometimes they actually have gradations of service, signal quality, and stuff like that. The FCC at the act of Congress, believe it or not, anyone know that Congress passed a law in 2020 called the Broadband Data Act, requiring wireless providers to submit coverage maps and shape files to the FCC? Like, it's the only, if you look at it, I did a word search for this. It's just, if you go search for the word propagation in all of the US government documents, the statutes, it only applies for, like, the word only shows up for, like, fish and wildlife, I guess propagation of tadpoles, and it's some FCC regulations. And so we've had to do propagation maps for the first time, had to be submitted and sort of requirements that had to go in. And clutter is obviously a key part of that. And that drives a lot of the work. We were talking during lunch, like, I'm a RF engineer and a lawyer as well. And I spend an inordinate amount of my time dealing with maps and clutter considerations. I deal with spectrum issues as well, but, like, as I'm taking the flight here, I'm dealing with clutter and map issues. So with that, I wanted to give an example of something I did this past couple weeks here, and I think it's going to show up. Here we go. This is, I'll zoom this out so everyone will recognize where this location is here very, very shortly. There we go. So this is a public-facing document we filed at the FCC 2 weeks ago now, of Manhattan, New York, New York County, New York. We had, the FCC requires that as wireless licensees, we have to do build-out notifications to show that we're using spectrum, right? It's a valuable resource, it's a public resource. It wants to be put to its highest and best use, and there are build-out requirements. And so these build-out requirements are often either population-based or they're geographic-based, but whatever it is, the net result is you have to do a demonstration to the FCC that, hey, yeah, we're using this. And so we did this demonstration here for the first time ever in the millimeter wave bands. This is a 28 gigahertz propagation map. And it is fascinating to me because there was so much that we spent, our engineers and folks, and us even the lawyers, spent on just trying to do this stupid map for Manhattan. Because when you all do clutter analysis, there's a lot of different users here, right? So there's scientific community folks, there's federal users, there's wireless carriers here. Most of the time when we do clutter work, we're looking at relatively large geographies, right? 1 mile or 2 miles or 5 miles or 10 miles or 100 miles, whatever, right? Or, it could be thousands of miles if you're in a space world. We're dealing with tens of feet, hundreds of feet here in this big example, because if anyone knows anything about millimeter wave, it doesn't work. Sorry, Verizon, if you're here, your 5G network didn't work. But we had a couple licenses, we have built a couple sites, but I mean, this is what we were able to cover in Manhattan with over 100 sites just for the one borough of New York, that's Manhattan Island, right? And it is really difficult to get a signal to propagate. And so when we were doing this, it's like, how do we generate these coverage maps? Because the FCC rules are geographic based and population based for this particular band. but it's like the signal goes like it will go maybe 300 or 400 feet, but then if you're lucky, if you can like do bank shots off of windows and buildings and stuff like that, it'll go 1,000 feet. And so we had a great deal of challenge when we were generating this and trying to get a I don't want to say the term accurate was used very accuracy or accurate was used in a prior panel, and I don't want to say anyone's ever inaccurate. Sometimes precision, right? I remember from schooling days, the difference between accuracy is reflective of an objective truth, whereas precision is trying to get down to that, a more precise or better rendition of this truth, right? And so it's really difficult to get a precise estimate of where the signal is. And so we spent a lot of time. I think our clutter model resolution was 2 meters for this particular one. But again, it's like 2 meters in Manhattan is like, does that mean the awning for the skyscraper was covered or not or whatever? And I don't know. Take a look at it. I mean, frankly, I'm not sure we entirely know because we don't. This particular map was rendered at 20-meter resolution. It's relatively precise, but again, it's all an estimate, right? It's probabilities and stuff like that. But we are looking at this. We have this one site here. This is Roosevelt Island, if anyone knows the East River and stuff like that. But there's the one site is here, and you can see the sort. We don't predict the site's not going to go very far, right? But it does have some. It gets across the island, across the East River, and into like the top of some condo skyscraper high-rise buildings, right, or whatever they are. And so we were able to show that there. And the FCC can get picky on some of this stuff. I think we've had a very good relationship. I think everyone realizes that rules that are designed for macro networks where we're dealing with hundreds of square miles, thousands of square miles of coverage is a little different when you're dealing with hundreds of square meters. That is a couple square miles that makes up the island of Manhattan. So I think we're working there, but it's just really, really difficult. You can see how the paths of the roads were depicted, right? I mean, it's like this funny staircase like, and how would it actually work? Your handset. I mean, again, folks who've had millimeter wave handsets, has anyone actually just for kicks like thrown their phone locked in the millimeter wave? It'd only be like for probably Verizon, most likely. T-Mobile, we have a couple people sites. You can do that. Anyone done that? Yeah, I haven't. I know of some colleagues who've done it, and it's like super hit and miss that actually work. Right? I mean, you can literally walk behind a tree and you lose your carrier and stuff. So it has its challenges. But this is it's our best efforts, and we're trying to reflect reality and how we do things. And it does work at some venues that really the concert venues and stuff like that. That's where we have found works out best, right? Ultra high density situations. And if you look at this map of New York, Manhattan, as you go further down the island, that's where we have more sites and stuff like that. So, so this was a very interesting clutter network planning example. Another reason I brought Manhattan up is we have these fun issues that pop up from time to time that my team and we deal with in a company and deals with is that the way the FCC licenses spectrum, as I mentioned, is often by geographic boundary. And throughout, depending on the band and radio service and history and stuff like that, you can have licenses done at a county level, And so using this map, if forgive me if you don't know, if you already know about New York, but New York City is technically 5 counties. And just above this is the Bronx, Yankee Stadium and stuff like that. And this is the Harlem River that separates the Bronx from Manhattan. And in theory, and actually in practice in some bands, we will have a licensed user on the opposite side of that river body that is maybe 100 meters wide, who also want to operate. And how do you get agreements on field density limits and interference concerns and like, and most of the time, the carrier's able to work it out, right? AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, even Dish, we most of the time are able to work out things. But the world of spectrum users is not just, or licensees at the FCC is not just limited to us 4 operators, and there often can be other entities who have licenses who think that they also should be able to maybe get some financial compensation because your clutter model, your propagation model is inaccurate. So you need to be, you're using my spectrum, so let's pay me, kind of thing, right? And we run from that the time to time, and so we run into those disputes. But again, clutter is a key thing because we will run propagation models. We think the signal will stop here, but you can. I loved Manhattan is such a great example because for prop models and for clutter analysis, because you can see that one site can run up this avenue right here, kind of like a little tunnel going across the East River. And I can guarantee you the aggrieved party on the other side of this in the Bronx will put their testing station, their monitoring station, right at the end of that road and measure the signal and say, evil T-Mobile, you guys are broadcasting into my spectrum, and that's a problem. And I deal with that. I can tell you it's real. And it's obviously not intentional. We're not trying to cause troubles, but our propagation model maps only work so well. There's a reality of the geography and stuff like that. So that is a great deal of difficulty we've run into. So with that, I have one or two other slides. I kind of is there any particular curiosities about how us as wireless carriers do with network deconfliction? Because I think I did a quick summary of like why we use propagation models, where we use it, and then why other carriers might make use of it and how clutter plays into account. Otherwise, I'm going to transition into a really boring CSMAC thing. But questions so far? Yeah, go ahead.
1 second.
What's the average height of these base stations? And the coverage map that you're showing, that's I suppose that's outdoor coverage. Is that indoor also?
Well, that's the whole clutter thing. So again, first off, what's the average height of a building in Manhattan? I don't know. If you add in the Empire, I mean, it's such a large. We're talking about standard deviations, right? There's a huge spread of building heights in Manhattan, and that's why it's such a great example for these issues. I don't know what the average height is. We have them on building tops. We have them on building faces. We have them in Manhattan. We have them pointing up to buildings. We have them pointing down for the buildings. We have them pointing into the buildings. We have them pointing out of the buildings. I mean, this is about 100 and some odd change sites, and you can kind of see what they're doing. They're 3 or 4 sectors, sometimes more. I don't think there's any 2-sector millimeter wave sites in Manhattan, but I don't know. But there's no average. I mean, I guess in theory, if I took all 120, I knew the height above the terrain. I'm not sure what the right term to use, and if for Manhattan it would be, but if I could do it, I could give you some kind of average. But the reality is, with Manhattan, you have a very diverse number of heights for buildings and where we put sites. And so there's no easy answer. And then going into building, it's very true, right? Our propagation models, even with 2 meter resolution, are just that. Going inside of a building is so difficult to figure out, especially if the site is on the building and it's pointing out, but you're getting reflectivity. And yeah, I mean, it was very difficult. I didn't realize it's a crap shot whether it's going to work or not. And then once you get into the building, I mean, that's, at the end of the day, we have a clutter model. We say this 2 meter pixel is worth, 8 dB of loss at such a frequency, right? When you're in such a high density, precise location, it is very, very difficult to come up with a maple, right? A maximum allowable path loss calculation, because it's really going to differ if you're sitting in the back of the conference room over there, or if you're right over here where the window is. And it's going to be like a 30 dB loss difference for something like that, which would, obliterate your carrier. So it's a very difficult conversation. And that's why I want to bring this up. This shows you how difficult we as a wireless carriers can face some of these issues.
So you had said this is millimeter wave?
Yes, this is millimeter wave, 28 gigahertz.
In New York City?
In New York City.
So those are circles that are going into buildings. They have to be. And I don't see how you're doing that because there's no possible way to go through most of those buildings. And the other thing is it makes a lot of sense that it goes down the road because that's free space. But the rest of those blobs is imaginary.
Everything here is imaginary, right? So first off, think of Manhattan. You said it's free space, but it's not free space in millimeter wave. It is street sign after street sign after street sign after stoplight.
And to the degree that there might be a tree in New York, rare as that may be.
Well, there's a taxi cab.
Yeah.
There's cars.
Or any clutter.
Yeah. And so you have a dynamic clutter environment. The FCC, no one, this is not addressed in the regulatory matter. And it's really, really difficult, right? I mean, maybe someone here has more expertise than I have, but no one in our company, I don't think anyone in the wireless industry builds propagation maps for in-building rooms that is used on a macro level network, right? We will assume a loss for a building. We have clutter models for residential, light industry, commercial, residence, and stuff like that. The FCC has some provisions for doing that with our coverage maps, but trying to figure out, just how far you can get into this hotel, bouncing, like a pool shot off of 18 different windows, it's really difficult, right?
Well, and it also depends upon what the materials of the building are. Is the glass thermal reflective material? If that's the case, it acts different than normal glass. Is there steel structure inside the building? How high up are you? And the angle of incidence is wrong. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's what I said. It's this issue of accuracy, precision. Is this accurate? It's a model, right? It's a propagation model. Is it inaccurate? Undoubtedly. Every propagation model is inaccurate inherently, right? Is it precise? Well, we work really hard to make it precise, but it's still inaccurate. So it's a challenge, right? It's not we're bad people, and it's not like there's bad rules. It's a really great deal of challenge that doesn't lend itself to easy answers. And this is it's a lot different story about running a propagation model in Manhattan, Kansas, which is relatively flat, than it is here in the island of Manhattan. Or the Appalachian, or pine trees. Pine trees are, anywhere you have a large forest, like Alabama or something like that, it's really difficult to get really precise, models and stuff like that. Other questions? I love the dialogue. This is kind of a fun thing to me because it's kind of boring to just talk about T-Mobile stuff all the time. Yeah.
Do you guys do any measurements indoor, meaning just to see,
Oh yeah,
anecdotal evidence of that you're getting?
Yeah,
coverage
they have various models. The models go through proving and refinements, and we've had it over the years. Millimeter wave in particular is very difficult. We buy a lot of our models, and we do some of our own testing and calibrate it against it. I don't think there's any Ted Rappaport's in here, right? There's the probity of any millimeter wave propagation model in a macro scale network is very limited in my mind. And the amount of effort that it would take to really prove it out would be astronomically large. Because you basically would have to have a couple college campuses worth of interns running around with handsets. And you would have to make sure all the streets stop, no one moves, nothing changes. And then you'd have to start incrementally increasing traffic, start running the taxi cabs, run the delivery truck. And then you add more people on the street. I mean, if you really wanted to make it really precise, because most of that stuff, like Rayleigh fading and stuff like that, we're used to macro network workers. We can predict that, right? You know how cars work, and the wavelength is like this big. There's ways to deal with it. When you're dealing with millimeter wave, and it's just so small and it's so funky that it's just really difficult to get it super precise. And again, it's the nature of the beast. So yeah. Other fun questions on propagation modeling here?
Hello, my name is MD Asif Syed. I'm from Cable Lab. I'm an intern over there. So my question is, can you please tell me an approximate average cell coverage area.
Sorry, a cell coverage area.
Yes.
So like how wide of us?
Yes, the red spot shows the coverage, right?
Well, so I think this is a clear example showing how there is no average here in Manhattan, right? It is it's going a couple hundred meters maybe at best. I don't know. I don't have a legend pulled up in this particular map, but I mean, if I had a different mapping application, I could pull it up. But the reality is the pixel size is making up a non-trivial percentage of that showing, right? And if you have to, at the end of the day, when you generate these maps, you have to decide a binary decision: is the pixel covered or not covered? And you have uncertainty and stuff like that. And yeah, so there's no average size I can say off the top of my head. Oops, for this. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah.
Something you were talking about with Richard. I just wanted to come back to clarify one thing. So what is the best that a mobile map the propagation signals? Is it just to assume a sort of average bell building entry loss and track that?
Yeah, I would say that's the way we do it today. A very good example that you've probably seen, and I'll pull it up here, is the broadband data collection, this Broadband Data Act, where the FCC required us to provide in-vehicle coverage. And
What?
In-vehicle coverage.
Oh, okay.
So if you were to, yeah, so let's go over here. Let's go to broadbandmap.fcc.gov. Anyone want to give me a random address that's interesting to them to type in? I can demonstrate this. We can, well, actually, I'll just
you can put in mine.
let me go by providers here, and we'll just put in T-Mobile because I work for T-Mobile. Go figure, and I can talk to my own stuff better. We'll go for 5G 35.3 new radio. Let's zoom in here up at Boulder. Blame the FCC, but when you go to this map, they don't let you type in addresses. So we're zooming in, and again, it's really the FCC takes our data. We provide 100 meter by 100 meter resolution pixels or better. They put in a level H3 hexagons, so there's loss in translation here. But we can zoom on in, and it says that we provide it, but you can see there's little pixel loss and stuff like that. But we make a difference if you go here to settings, where you have outdoor stationary, and then you go to in-vehicle mobile. And you can see now it contracted, right? And what that is, what that is the wireless carriers work with the FCC, came to kind of a uniform agreement about how to treat the difference between outdoor stationary versus in-vehicle mobile. And I think it's like a subtraction of 8 or 9 dB. It's a discount, right? Yeah. There's all sorts of factors that went into it, but the bottom line was the FCC was looking for something that's uniform because they want to provide consumers with a relatively friendly, easy to understand way to compare apples to apples, right? For wireless service. So that was how that works. And obviously it can go a lot better, a lot more precise as engineers. There's all sorts of flaws in that particular work. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with consumers, ordinary people who want to be able to see things, politicians. So yeah, simpler is better, especially for the politician aspect. So, yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
So when you create this map, is this for all technologies at 5G NR? So is this FR1 every license that you have for T-Mobile?
Yeah, so what we're required is to build the map based on speed where we have network. So it doesn't necessarily translate the licenses per se. So for instance, if anyone's a T-Mobile customer, if you've ever gone to Alaska, we do not have a network in Alaska. We have a partnership with Alaskan provider GCI. However, we have licenses in Alaska that we lease to GCI. And so we have licenses there. They use it. Their network. They have to do the filing. We just have to go on these speed criteria. So And we don't provide all our network technologies. Like we do have a little bit of 2G still on the air, very little. We don't submit that. It's kind of irrelevant for the FCC's purposes, stuff like that.
And so do you have to use an FCC tool to determine the data rate? Is
No,
there any
no.
validation for that? Or is it just like
We
any
have-
tool that determines data rate and it's kind of self-monitored?
We build a link budget, which is submitted to the FCC, which you can download. So if anyone wants to see it, you can see our clutter models. There are many, many, many models and data sources. If you want to go to broadbandmap.fcc.gov, you can download and you can see what we do. So yeah. Secret little tidbit and trivia for the day is also to answer your network. The one piece of our network that we don't show on here is Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. T-Mobile actually runs the network. We have Cuba's only 5G network. It is run in the U.S. Navy, and it's not shown up there on the map. But yeah, we have there. So, but yeah, there are places they don't necessarily show all the idiosyncratic issues on. So, all righty. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to present, and feel free to flag me down if you have any other questions.